Hi everyone, and welcome to the first in our weekly series where we'll be looking at how the events industry is responding to COVID-19. So I'm Lauren Demule-Meester and I work in the business development team here at Higher Space Professional and will be hosting you today. So each week we'll be discussing the most pressing issues for event professionals and take a forward look at how the events world is emerging from the pandemic. So today we'll be covering two topics. So firstly, the coronavirus job protection scheme. As we all know, there's been an extension on the furlough scheme until the end of June, but will this be enough for businesses in the events industry? Secondly, we'll be exploring how hospitality venues will be amongst the last to have their restrictions lifted, and we'll be looking into what this means for forward planning in events. So we'll be taking questions from the audience throughout the webinar, so please submit any questions you have in the comments box of Vimeo, or if you're watching a live stream from our social media, you can just drop the comments in over there and we'll pick those up towards the end. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Hughes, who is the Vice Chair of British Visits and Events Partnership, and as we all know, represent the UK associations in the sector and have been on the front lines of negotiating with the UK government during the pandemic. So we're also joined by Carina Bauer, who is the CEO of IMEX, as we all know, the leading show in global exhibition for meeting and events industry, and who are currently pressing ahead with their Las Vegas show in September. So great to have you both online today. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So I think let's just jump straight in with the first question. So on the coronavirus job protection scheme, the government have obviously announced that they're going to be extending the furlough until the end of June, which is obviously fantastic news for many businesses. But is it going to be enough for the events industry? So Simon obviously is part of BVEP. It'd be great to hear your take on this, as you've been pretty much on the front lines of negotiations with the government here.
Thanks very much, Lauren. I think the extension is welcome, but I think there are still very specific issues for the event industry that this rather blunt instrument of furlough is not satisfying. And certainly that's something we've been hearing from across different sectors in the industry itself. So, for example, all the folks working in kind of outdoor festivals and events, their whole season has been disrupted pretty much by COVID-19. So the furlough for them really doesn't really work in many ways. And a lot of people are saying we seem to be ignoring the planning cycle required for events of all different types. And that's one of the issues, is actually you might need your sales team to be managing contracts 6 months, 8 months out, but actually they could be on furlough. They're not allowed to do that. They'd be breaking the law effectively. Yeah. Or you might be running, a kind of caravan park, and you've had to lay off all the people who look after the grounds, which means that your opportunity to make the place look good before you reopen just doesn't work. You might be running a pub. That could take 4 weeks to restock, get the beer back in, get the pipes cleaned out. And again, furlough from that point of view it is presenting challenges to our industry across the piece. But it's not surprising, is it? I think that's the other thing. We need to be very realistic. It was rushed in, as many measures have been, to support business and to support individuals. So there will be problems. And one of the good things, I think, is that the government seems to be open to hearing about those problems. And so we're regularly feeding back. When we hit issues that particularly affect our sector, we are reporting that back into government departments, and they in turn are taking that to people at HM Treasury, who are behind a lot of the measures that have been taken to support UK business in this really challenging and very, very difficult time.
Yeah. And is there anything else we can hope for next in terms of government supports, or is it just in the talks right now?
Well, I think there's a lot of attention being paid to some of the specific schemes. In fact, they've just launched a new tracker online where if you are in business and you're wanting to find out what kind of support's available, you can now do that online and look at the various options of the different schemes that they've got. there still remains some, some challenges just around the speed of implementation. We've been pushing very hard on business rates to ensure that people running venues, but also agents booking accommodation, agents booking travel, are included in exemption of business rates, for example. And that gets into very complicated and detailed stuff around which code you have in your business, et cetera, et cetera. So it's unsurprising, though, I mean, given the speed that we've had to react to this challenge, it's unsurprising that we do have problems and we do have challenges. But I'm confident that they're open to listen to these. I think that's one of the really good things that we've heard. And like lots of other people, they're having to work really hard to stay ahead of it. It's I've never seen the civil service quite so engaged and quite so committed in very difficult circumstances. Like us, they're all working from home. Majority of them are working from home, having to cope with the demands that brings as well. So big challenge for all of us. And that horrible phrase, "we're all in it together," is actually completely true. It's completely
true. For sure. Well, that's really great to hear then. So Carina, obviously you've got that global perspective on events. So how does that compare with how other countries have obviously been mitigating the impact on their industry?
Well, I wouldn't like to pretend I have the knowledge on what every country is doing, of course, across the world. The responses have been many and varied. I think if you look at the UK government's response, it is up there with the schemes in other Northern European countries that we usually look towards as being sort of best in class in terms of their social security that they provide. Offering 80% of salary up to £2,500 is beyond what some countries, in fact, in Northern Europe are doing, where it's maybe 70 or 75%. So I think, the government, certainly, as Simon said, they've moved very fast, and I think that was very welcome. And obviously there are other countries like the US where, as you would expect, they don't have the same social security sort of net that underpins things. And so what they're doing really is providing grants and business loans as opposed to salary support. So, it's different all over the world. I very much agree with Simon, though. I think to get governments, not just the UK government, but governments across the world to understand the impact on hospitality and the events industry is very specific. We were the first to be impacted. And so I think what's interesting with that is that both governments and consumers at large saw immediately the impact of big, mass events cancelling, like Mobile World Congress, and they saw that businesses immediately went into administration, and not just any businesses that are specifically, not just an agency, for example, in the event sector, but also hospitality businesses like restaurants or taxi drivers who are being, heavily impacted. And the same happened in the States with South by Southwest, which, the whole destination of Austin is reliant upon. So I think what's interesting is that maybe there's from the optimistic side, perhaps a better understanding out there of the economic impact that events have. But I think there does need to be at some point a recognition from government of this long tail of impact that hospitality and events are going to have. Because, you can't just say, well, we're in phase 1 of opening up, so we can have a 10,000 person event, or even a 500 person event, or even a 50 person event. So, we are going to be the last to come online. And therefore, I think in terms of what Simon said, it's really great to hear that the government and the civil service are engaged and do want to listen, because I think there's a big learning curve for them. If I look at a trade show like IMEX, it takes many, many months to put everything in place, and you have to do that with no income. So that's what we face when we're a startup business in trade shows or events. That's what you're doing. But the difficulty now is that there's so little certainty about when things will come online. So I think if the government could understand that there is that very long tail and long cycle for us, and if they could also understand that actually support events because we're a catalyst for future growth. I think those two things could help them perhaps to help us even better. I would say I do welcome what they've done so far, and I do agree that, you know, they moved quickly, and so it's not going to be perfect. But there's an opportunity for us now, I think, to really explain what this industry is about, what it can do for government and for the economy, and therefore why and how they should support us in this time. And I you know, are really grateful to Simon and BVEP for the work that they're doing on behalf of us all in that regard.
As we all are. And I think that leads, well, I think you touched upon the second subject there about how, you know, the events world is going to be forward planning with regards to obviously the statement that we heard last week on how hospitality venues will be amongst the last to have restrictions lifted. So obviously with IMEX coming up in September, a lot of people are going to be looking your way. So what type of big decisions have you had to take in preparation for this event, and how are you planning in bringing it all together?
I mean, I think first of all, I think, again, there's an opportunity for us as an industry, probably as a global industry, to come up with our own guidelines, if you like, of how we can start opening hospitality or event venues, and how we can start running events with certain guidelines in place. And maybe that would help the government as well to allow us to get going. So there are certainly, you know, if I look in Las Vegas, for example, the Strip is closed at the moment, but the Wynn Las Vegas has brought out a sort of, you know, 100-page document of how they are going to operate in a new normal, and give that sort of confidence to travelers who might want to stay there. And so it's things like thermal scanning, you know, cleanliness preparation, hand sanitizers, but also rejigging the whole of their property to actually allow people to use the casinos, to use the restaurants, but in a more socially distanced way. I would say there are limits, though. You know, you can take this to the nth degree, and obviously in the position we're in today in lockdown, you can't hold an event. And I think in a position where you're in what in America they're calling phase 1, which is still, you know, events up to, or gatherings up to 10 people, still a lot of social distancing. Our business still can't get back to normal, anything like normal, you know, in that guise. So I think we have to look at what will events look like when we can get back to business, but how do we give people that safety and security that they can come into venues and that they can come to events, so that we're putting in place that sanitation and the health and safety, and also looking at how do we look at our events differently to sort of dissipate crowds. So if I think about our events, you know, IMEX in Frankfurt, IMEX America, I'm not just looking at this year, I'm looking at what will they be like in 2021 and 2022. The period of time when people come in to registration and are trying to get into the show on that first morning is hugely busy and very crowded. And even when we're able to hold our IMEX show again, I have to think about whether people will feel comfortable to be in that kind of crowd. And we don't know the answer to that if we're looking ahead months or even a year. But I think from our perspective, what we're starting to do is work with our venues and work with the events and the trade show industry to try to map out what are all those things that we need to think about, whether it's capacity in a meeting room, a banquet space, what are the social gatherings going to look like? What about food and beverage? You know, is a pass around service okay when it's the food is open? So there's so many elements to look at. And I think as an industry, the only way we can do this is to try to tackle that together, because it's every element of our events that need to be at least thought about, even if you decide that's the only way we can do them. So then you have a decision as to whether to do it or not. But every single element needs to be thought through. And I can see that there are different organisations who are starting to do that. And the sanitation is going to be, you know, top of the list, even if you're handing someone a badge. Is it sanitized? Should somebody think about that? So that there are lots of implications for us all.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be a focus point for many events in forward planning, that's for sure. So Simon, do you have any great examples of how you've seen businesses responding to the new demand, or anything else you'd like to add to this topic?
Yes, I think, Lauren, the Production Services Association came up with a great line here in the UK, which was the industry requires clarity and parity. And by that, they mean clarity of communication in terms of either new measures or the beginning of lifting of restrictions, being very clear the way those are communicated to people, and parity in terms of recognizing the economic impact and contribution that we've been talking about of the events industry. That in many ways, actually, being told that we're going to be in an almost throwaway line from Michael Gove over the weekend, that we would be hospitality would probably be the last to get going. That's not helpful, actually. He wouldn't be saying that if it was the automotive sector. He certainly isn't saying that about the airlines that are in deep, deep crisis at the moment. And so we do need to kind of continue to push how much we contribute to the UK economy and the global economy, in fact, in terms of the huge spread of benefit across an extended supply chain that we've been hearing about earlier. And let me give you an example of the clarity thing. Yeah. This whole notion of massed gatherings, that's not what we do. We don't organize mass gatherings where thousands of people just turn up. We organize events. We organize summit meetings. We organize massive exhibitions where people are invited. So they aren't mass gatherings. They're really carefully organized professional gatherings. And we need to be much more passionate about getting that message across. We know who's coming because we've invited them. Here in the UK, we had that interesting thing where we got business events into the tourism sector deal. And I, for a while, thought, all the sector deals are going to have to be rewritten given the new world that we're entering post this kind of COVID-19 situation. But actually, in that sector deal that business events feature in for tourism, there's a whole thing about big data, how we should deploy big data. And that actually really comes into its own when you think about that new world and the new way of organizing things. We organize events where we know who we've got coming to it. We know where they've come from. Now, we might start asking them, how old are you? Have you got any pre-existing medical conditions? Have you had COVID-19? We might start using the data that we collect to actually really work out how best to give them the experience of live and what protection measures we need to put around them, how we might get them to the event, or how we might say, actually, we've scored you, you're not coming to this event, you're going to stay online. It's going to be a hybrid event. So you will be a VIP digital guest, but you can't actually come to it. So there's some really fundamental changes, I think, in the way we look at things. And it's challenging. It does need a global effort. It needs real collaboration across the piece. But also, bizarrely, I think it's a huge opportunity to change the way the event industry is regarded globally. We're not just about live. We're about reaching out and engaging people in lots of different ways across lots of different channels. And that's where we're heading now. The way we used to do things that's gone. We'll bring the best bits of that forward, but we're going to be doing things in a very, very different way moving ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've seen from clients at HireSpace as well. When they're coming with their event inquiries, further down the line, they're already considering it to be a hybrid event. So it's definitely something that we can reflect on the inquiries coming in at the moment as well. So I can see that we've been receiving a lot of questions whilst we were talking. So let's try to tackle a couple of these now. So I'll just select maybe between 1 and 5. So first question is from Luke Nelson on LinkedIn. So do you force many mergers and acquisitions in the coming weeks and months? I think that he meant to say foresee. Did any one of you want to select one of those? Want to tackle it?
Yeah, I think I've described this whole period as being a very testing time. It's testing the industry, it's testing us individually, and it will certainly test businesses. And I think so. Businesses that have got really good relationships with their clients and their customers, who operate across lots of different channels to support the activity in the supply chain in terms of the services that they offer, those businesses will be tested and they'll survive. Businesses that have not developed that kind of relationship, have not dealt with their supply chain fairly and adequately, might be found out. And therefore, I think we might see some of those businesses disappearing. The really big challenge in terms of that question is we've got challenges on the supply side and we've got challenges on the demand side as well. So the combination of bringing those two things together in this crisis is really toxic, and it's happening globally as well. So I think there will be mergers, probably more mergers and acquisitions actually, because some businesses just won't have enough demand, and a lot of businesses are acquired because of the demand that they can bring with them in terms of a client base, an active client base, because it's this terrible mix of the supply and demand side both being impacted when we live in a kind of very service economy world that is going to be a real challenge. So a lot of businesses will be impacted in one way or another, I think, to sum up that answer.
Yeah, no, thank you, perfectly. And so second question we have from James Cater on Twitter. So he mentioned sustainability has dropped off the map a bit. Will it continue to be an important driver of decision making? So maybe Carina, this is a good one for you, I think.
Yeah.
One coming up.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we at IMEX have been very vocal and very active in driving the sustainability of the events industry. What we found was in the immediacy of the crisis, if you like, so over the past 6 weeks, quite rightly, everybody was dealing with the crisis in front of them. Sanitation and health and safety, as I said, is going to be a top priority for us looking forward. However, what we found, and we've done some surveys on this as well, is that sustainability hasn't dropped off the agenda for people.
Yeah.
There are the last survey we did, which was at the end of March, beginning of April, it was about 50-50 in terms of people who were not interested in hearing about it right now, and those who were really thinking that they could take the opportunity to prepare themselves for the comeback. And one of those things is, let me learn how to create my events more sustainably, let me learn what I need to do. And we've had conversations, in fact, this week with different companies in the trade show industry who are definitely taking that approach, and sustainability is still the top of their agenda. I think so. I think there's still an opportunity right now to talk about sustainability. The other thing that I think is interesting, and I've seen it a little bit mentioned in a few places, is that I think coming out of this, if you think of the people, the participants, the delegates of your events, what's going to be important to them? This has been a time when everything has stopped, and it's a time when people are very reflective at the moment. They're reflective of themselves and their surroundings and the nature around themselves as well, and they can see the positive impacts on the environment of the negative impacts of our economy stopping. And so there's this dichotomy, and there's a big question around the environmental impacts. And it'll be very obvious when we go back to business as usual, if there is such a thing, of the impacts that we are starting to have on the environment. And I think that will be even more obvious to people because of this pause. And so I don't think the debate around sustainability has gone away. For obvious reasons, it's not top of people's agenda today in most cases. However, I think that we need to think forward 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in terms of look at this crisis and what it's done to us. I'm not saying sustainability or environmentalism will have the same immediate impact on our industry. But at the end of the day, there's a big danger here that people say, you know what, from an environmental reason, I'm not going to travel to this event, or I'm not going to attend the event because what they're doing when they put on the event isn't based around my sustainability values or my environmental values. And I think actually we could see that happening quicker because of these lockdowns right around the world. So it's difficult because we're in a crisis mode at the moment, and we want to deal with just how do we get out of this crisis mode. But I think it would be a big miss if we thought sustainability had gone away. I think it hasn't at all, is my opinion.
For sure. And I think especially with the rise of hybrid events, it's only going to make it easier for people to be able to attend events remotely. And I think we'll all get a good chance to practice that in the coming weeks and months, that's for sure. So third question we have is a question from Esther Frankel on LinkedIn. So which organizations have you seen handle the crisis really well, and why? Who would like to take this one? I'll think of any.
Yeah, I will. I'll actually suggest, and this is obviously a very particular viewpoint, that all the people involved in kind of business tourism, working both at Visit Britain, but also in the DCMS, that's the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Department, have really been coping extraordinarily well with the demands that's being put on them by our industry, and feeding that through. The support of officials who have quite willingly said, if it's not working, tell us, we need to know, give us the exact detail, give us analytics, give us specifics so that we can challenge about whether banks are lending properly. They've really stepped up to the plate. I think I'm very, very happy to acknowledge that. I also think, and I've come across, I won't name them because I think that's wrong for me as a vice chair of the BVEP, but lots of our really leading agencies have recognized that although it's very, very difficult for them, the absolute focus has to be on supporting their clients, finding out what their clients need right now, and then delivering against those needs. And I think that's been significant, actually. And this is going to go on for a while yet. This is going to be a long slog. But that creativity and that engagement and that thinking about, what is the new order going to look like? How are we going to deliver in that kind of environment? Why, what values, such as sustainability, we've just been talking about, will we need to bring forward as we go ahead? That's been quite heartening in a rather kind of grim time. I've always a big advocate for the creativity that exists within our production sector here in the UK. It is world leading, and I would never be embarrassed to say that. We are a world leading creative nation, and some of our best agencies have really stepped up to helping their clients by delivering really innovative, engaging communications in this really tough time.
For sure. And I think in all moments of crisis, it's really important to pivot and really kind of cater to the new needs that arise. So another question from Adrian Dobson on Facebook. Where do you think the specifics on opening back up will come from? Will it be the government, professional bodies, or will it be from venues themselves?
Shall I start on that?
Yes,
one?
Please.
I think, the line that the government here in the UK uses is we are only acting on when we have advice from either the medical experts or the scientific experts. So it'll be a government decision based on expert advice driven out of science and medicine. There's no doubt about that. That means we've got no idea when that's going to happen. That's the downside to having to rely on medical experts. I think 4th of May we will find out whether or not this is going to be extended. My suspicion is, even though we're beginning to see numbers moving in the right direction in terms of daily mortality rates, we might well be extended for another 3 weeks. But it will be a government decision. What we're doing, though, as an industry, is we're getting ready in terms of scenario planning to be ready for that decision. So one of the other things I think we need to do too, to be ready for that, is to try and make sure we're not that kind of ad hoc, oh yeah, and the hospitality sector will be the last to get going. But we need to, we need to be able to manage the ending of the pause, the restart, the recovery. We need to manage that. And we need to also, we talked about this earlier, really think carefully about the confidence that we need to create for people to start coming back together again, to start moving from the safety of their homes back into organized gatherings, back into professional gatherings. So we need to think carefully about how we inspire that confidence. So that will require us as an industry to work very collaboratively with government and with the kind of Public Health England experts, so that we know what it is we need to offer people to make them say, I'm going to go to that event because I know that they'll have done everything they possibly can to make it as safe and secure as possible.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're seeing across the world, really. The ability to come out of lockdown, and these will obviously come from governments, and that's different in different places. If you look at the US, it's obviously very driven by the governor of each state, and obviously here it's much more centralized. But I agree with what Simon said, and building upon what we said earlier, which is that we can work in preparation on those scenarios, and we can also work with government around those scenarios, because it's one thing being allowed to open up again and start gathering, and it's another thing actually there being demand for it because people's confidence or sentiments have changed. So I think that's the work we can put in now, and maybe as well give the government some confidence that we know what we're doing and that we've worked on those scenarios. So I think that at a certain point, not right now, but at a certain point, that can go hand in hand, because if they see that they would like to start opening up and getting people to start participating in normal life events like business events, they also need confidence in us as an industry that we have done that scenario planning and that we can present to them some scenarios whereby that can be done in a safe fashion that follows their advice. So I think that goes hand in hand, but quite obviously the order will come from the central government.
For sure. But we will definitely try to push them that way when the time comes, I think. So I think we have time for one last question. So from Alex Lightman on LinkedIn, what one thing are you most positive about at the moment? Which I think is quite a good way to wrap up, to be honest. So either of you, I know you have mentioned some positive moments, but if either of you could select one, please go ahead.
I think for me, well, first of all, thanks for the question, because I really think that's a great way to end, and you have to look at the positive or the silver linings of in order to move forward. I think for me, I strongly believe that the fundamentals of our business, which were very strong, most people have had a very healthy 2019 and the years leading up to it. And why is that? That's because live events are hugely productive, hugely effective. They form a massively important part of marketing, of a sort of broad marketing channels. Face-to-face, the need and the desire of human beings to connect face-to-face hasn't gone anywhere, isn't going to go anywhere. So I suppose if there's one thing to be optimistic about, it's about the long-term future of the industry. And the long-term future, I think, is very solid, because nothing's changed in that underlying necessity to meet face-to-face. However, when we can get together again, how long that takes, how that looks, what we do in terms of more virtual platforms, hybrid events, I think those are the questions. And that's the difficulty because of the uncertainty of that time scale. But if we're looking long term, then I'm optimistic about the industry and what we can do. And as Simon said, we're a hugely creative industry. People may not realize, but the UK is a global powerhouse for business events and also trade shows. Trade shows is a massively important part of our service export centre. So, all the largest trade show companies in the world are based in the UK, pretty much. And I think people are often surprised about that. So the long-term future, I'm very optimistic about.
Yeah, and I think feelings of wanting to get together have only intensified over the last period. So
absolutely,
it's only going to be even better from now on. Simon, do you have anything to add before we head off?
I got really worried just before the lockdown came on. I was asked to appear on BBC World and BBC One. And they were going to ask me, they were going to present me with a very, very long list of all the events around the world that had been cancelled and say, what does this mean? Well, actually, I've thought about that. And what it means is exactly to what we've just heard, how important events in all their variety are to us as human beings. Whether it's cultural events, sporting events, whether it's business events, exhibitions, whether it's governments coming together, different trade organizations, people sharing knowledge about vaccines, people sharing knowledge about how to deal with pandemics. It's an essential part of our world. And so that huge and horrible long list they were going to hit me over the head with just reinforces in my mind the value and the real richness of experience and opportunity that live brings us in its many formats. And yes, it's going to change, and yes, we're going to have to adapt, and we're going to have to think of new ways of doing things, but what a great opportunity. So that's what I'm hanging on to. It's really tough times. People are really suffering, and there is loss. But our spirit, our human spirit, always looks for the future, looks to the future, and always has hope there, I think. So I think that's another great sustaining feature, which we all need to kind of remind ourselves about.
For sure, I think on a daily basis, to be honest. So I think on that note, we've run out of time for today, but it's been an absolute pleasure hosting both of you today. And thank you for everyone for tuning in. Obviously, thanks to our speakers, Carina Bauer and Simon Hughes. As I mentioned at the start, this is the first of our weekly series event. So we'll be back next week, Wednesday at 11 a.m. And hopefully both of you will be able to join us further down the line. So if you have any questions for our panelists next week, please email us on covid19@hirespace.com or message us on our social media handles at Hirespace. So we'll be announcing the topics for next week on both our social media and our live news page, which should be you should be able to find a link in the description area. So thank you again for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you all next week.